Thanks everyone for tuning in and checking out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins, and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Paul Voisard, who's a partner here at the firm, a true negotiation tactician and architect. Paul, if you're open to it, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us just a little bit about your career and your background so the listeners can get just a flavor of your negotiation experience. Also, maybe you can let us know at what point in your career did you discover the importance of negotiations and start to actually take it seriously. So I also want to say to the listeners that Paul happens to be a partner here at the firm, and he's actually my boss. So this is a pretty rare and unique opportunity for me to get to chat with him. So with that being said, Paul, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Matt. Much appreciated. Happy to be here. Should be fun.
Yeah, we're happy to have you.
Excellent. All right, a little bit about myself, how I found myself where I am today. Well,
Yes.
It's a long, meandering path, as it is for probably a lot of people.
Sure.
I've spent the last 10 years of my life now devoted exclusively to all things negotiation. The prior 4 and a bit years now with the Maker Group in my capacity as a partner. And prior to that, spent 5 years with another negotiation firm called the Gap Partnership, based out of London in the UK. In my roles in both companies, spent extensive time helping our corporate clients do 2 things in essence. 1, negotiate better deals, and 2, make themselves better negotiators, by and large. So again, for the past 10 years, my life has been devoted exclusively to all things negotiations. I've worked with clients spanning every industry imaginable, from consumer packaged goods to healthcare to oil and gas to energy to technology, manufacturing, engineering, and everything else in between. So I've got a unique perspective of having seen a slice of many different flavors of negotiations across the spectrum of the commercial and corporate world. Prior to me diving in headfirst into negotiation, I began my career in project management capacity, working in private sector defense.
Okay.
Spent 5 years working for a private sector defense contractor. And then after that, started my own company, my own security technology company for 5 years. I built that. I grew that. We eventually sold that off to a multinational. That's actually when I took a little bit of sabbatical in my life, an early retirement, if you will, enjoyed the fruits of my labor and traveled the world and got to just relax for a minute. And
Wow.
it was then when I was approached by my former employer to join their firm in a negotiation consultant capacity, which seemed really interesting because, to come back to one of your questions of, when did it become apparent that negotiation was so important? Well, that became apparent from day one. I think, most people fundamentally understand that you negotiate every day of your life in many different capacities and in many different ways. Few people take the time to step back and truly analyze it at the depth and level that we do. But again, fundamentally, everybody understands that we negotiate all the time. So what better life skill to devote your life to or your craft to than, negotiation, seeing as it impacts all these various facets of everything that we do. So again, it was apparent very early on that negotiation was important. And that's when I had the opportunity to kind of dive headfirst into the world of negotiation. I took it, and it's been 10 years and I haven't looked back.
Wow. I mean, you must have some true passion for it after spending some time going away and then coming back to it. So it's pretty apparent that that's something that you love. Talking about negotiations as a purposeful endeavor, I think there's a subset of people out there that you said are negotiating every day, maybe don't even know it, in their personal lives, but also even in the world of negotiations where people are just kind of doing it, right? They're like kind of winging it. And I know that one of the founding tenets, one of the baked into the DNA of the Maker Group is pre-planning for negotiation, actually being purposeful in that. Can you talk a little bit about that concept in the sense of how Maker thinks about that and how they train their clients in terms of preparation and taking it serious?
Sure. Here's the thing. Most people, to your point, fail to realize they're even in negotiations half the times. And when they do realize they're involved in a negotiation, they're woefully underprepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
For better or worse, Hollywood has taught us to believe that negotiations happen at the boardroom table in the heat of the moment, where you're looking across the table from the other party all steely-eyed and trying to outmaneuver them in the moment. But obviously that's not really how negotiations happen in the corporate world, in the commercial world. It makes for good entertainment, but less so for practical negotiations. And because of that, I think people spend too much time worrying about the things that they're going to do or say in the midst of the negotiation, and they don't spend enough time thinking about all the things that they should be doing leading up to what they're going to do and say during the negotiation. And what one thing that we believe in strongly, and we parrot it ad nauseum, is successful negotiation comes down to 90% planning, 10% execution. It's all the things you do beforehand that are going to determine how successful you are when you get to the actual negotiation proper. But if you don't get your ducks in a row leading up to it, then all the steely-eyed glances across the table aren't going to get you what you want from the other party, because by the time you get there, your path has already been set to a certain extent. Your options are defined, and now you're just choosing amongst a series of options that you probably don't even like. And so, without going too far down the rabbit hole, spending more time at the early stages of thinking about what's my communication strategy going to be? What are the things that I'm here to negotiate over? What's my objective? What am I really trying to accomplish at a fundamental level? These are just some of the things that you want to assess before the formal negotiation begins, and really have your ducks in a row in that respect, because that's what's going to determine your success later on.
It's funny how you talk about the differences between a movie negotiation and ones in real life. And another analogy that I might make about that is that everybody thinks that in the world of fitness that it's what you're doing in that hour you're in the gym, but really it's the other 23 hours that you're outside of the gym, eating well, stress reduction, etc. So I think, like most things in life, if I'm understanding you correctly, negotiations follow the path of, in the moment, there's some execution, but it's all the preparation around it, correct?
Yeah. You can work out for an hour and burn, maybe 500, 600, 700 calories if you're lucky. And then you can go home and eat a gallon of ice cream and, put 2,500 calories back into the bank. And
that's right.
what did the hour do for you? So
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good analogy, right? Negotiation it's that hour counts when you're actually doing the negotiation, but it's everything outside of that hour that's equally, if not more important as well.
Fair enough. In addition to the trainings and where we talk about pre-planning as a team to the clients, Maker also has a digital platform that they use for planning, execution, but also as a central repository of information so that revenue leaders can know about what was negotiated, who negotiated, escalation strategies, etc. Can you talk a little bit about the name? So the name of that tool is Maker Connect, the same as this podcast. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that tool?
Sure. The tool was born out of our past decade of work with clients, and again, born out of their requests from us. Hey, we need something more, because traditionally, the solution in the marketplace for negotiation upskilling has been negotiation workshops, really intense multi-day workshops. We're going to, put you through your paces, give you ample opportunity to practice and try new things and really expand your horizon around negotiation. And the workshops are great. They're fantastic. People love them. They learn a ton. Some would go as far as to say that they're transformational to the way that they approach business and negotiations. But like all things in life, you go through a training, it's great. and then you go back to the real world, and a week later, a month later, old habits creep back in, and what you learned starts to fade, and you just start to fall back on old habits. So what we saw was a need and an opportunity, again, born from what our clients were telling us. Hey, how can we make the learning stick? How can we ensure that we would teach our people today is as fresh tomorrow, a week later, a month later, a year later? And obviously leveraging technology seemed like the most practical path to accomplishing that objective. So we created the Maker Connect platform. It's the industry's first and only negotiation planning tool that allows users to think through all of the soft aspects of a negotiation in addition to the numbers. Because there's a lot of software out there, again, that will allow you to capture the numerical data points of any given negotiation. But what our tool is designed to do is to give people a gentle reminder for all the other things that they need to be thinking about, and gentle guidance in the direction of, hey, have you thought about how much power you have in this negotiation? Have you thought about where your sources of power come from? Have you thought about how the other party perceives you and your position of power? Have you thought about how you can go about changing that perception of power in your negotiation? And again, this is all stuff that we do before we even get to the numbers. The numbers come much, much later. But these are just kind of some of the more ephemeral topics that we talk about, and that the tool is designed to walk people through to give them that, it's like having a negotiation consultant in your pocket. It's like having me standing on your shoulder and being like, hey, have you thought about power? How much do you have? How much do you need? How are you going to change it? So that was kind of the impetus for the creation of the tool. And obviously it does a whole bunch of stuff. To your point, it's a knowledge repository, historical records, data keeping. It does a whole lot of stuff, but at 100,000 feet, it's designed to be a consultant in your pocket to help people plan and prepare more effectively for all the other things that people tend to forget about in their negotiations.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing a lot too when I'm listening to you, is that there are hundreds of data points and considerations in any negotiation. And instead of having them all over the place, the Maker Connect brings them all into one tool, which is step one, I think. But the other big benefit to this too, and I think this is what we train as a team, is that internal alignment, right? And so having that Maker Connect ensures that, or encourages that, everybody on the team is using the same strategies with the same information, and everybody can view it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it probably sounds overly simplistic, but one of the biggest barriers to success in most large commercial negotiations is gaining internal alignment around a path forward. Like, what are we here to do? What are we here to accomplish? What's our objective? What are the risks that are facing us? What's our appetite towards those risks? What are we willing to do if risks materialize? And how are we going to mitigate the impacts of those potential risks? Again, just to pick a brief example.
Yeah. The
more internally aligned you are around these topics, ultimately, the more confident you are as a frontline negotiator. Right? Like, I mean, and this is not just unique to negotiation. This is true about all things in life. When we're confident about something, we're more effective at it, right?
Sure.
Like, if you have to go and play a baseball game and you're really good at playing baseball, like you're going to go out there and you're going to be confident. But, if you're in a 0 for 20 slump and you haven't hit a ball in the last 3 weeks, you're going to get up at the plate and you're probably going to be a little sheepish. So same thing in negotiation, right? The more confident you are, the more effective you are. And how do you increase confidence? Well, there's nothing that makes somebody feel more confident going into a negotiation than knowing that their boss has their back. And their boss's boss has their back. And all the way up the ladder, top to bottom, left to right, everybody is aligned and in lockstep with, hey, this is what we're here to do. This is our objective. This is what we're going to try to accomplish. We understand it could go wrong. There's some risks involved. We're all okay with those risks. We've talked about them. We've socialized them. And we're going to try to prevent those things from happening in the first place. But if they do happen, it's part of the plan, and we've got a strategy to move forward from there. So if I walk into a negotiation with that level of confidence, because I know that, again, my boss and my boss and boss, my boss and boss, and we're all in agreement, all aligned, then all I have to do as a negotiator is just go in there and execute the plan.
Execute.
Right? Because the opposite of that scenario is somebody walking into a negotiation thinking to themselves, if this thing goes south, and if this thing doesn't go according to plan, how is that going to make me look? What does that do to my reputation? What questions are my boss going to have for me? How is this blame going to get pinned on me? Or you start playing the blame game, right? And this is a game that everybody in the corporate world has played before and is well aware of. It's not my fault. This thing fell apart because so-and-so didn't do what they were supposed to do. And they say, well, it's not my fault. This thing didn't work because those people over there didn't give us the answers or the data that we needed in order to, get clarity on this. And they say, well, yeah, but they couldn't agree on what the thing was that they wanted the data for, so we couldn't give it to them and they couldn't give it to you. So it just becomes this game of the blame game. So you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Now, it's in large, complex organizations, not as easy as it sounds. In fact, quite difficult to do in a lot of cases. But that's your North Star. That's what you're trying to get towards, is that alignment where everybody's in lockstep, everybody knows what's going on, everybody agrees, and you can move forward as one unified team, in essence.
Yeah, and in looking at that Maker Connect platform, and then we'll change topics here, but I mean, personally, I've seen it, and it does just that. I mean, it puts everybody in alignment. The analogy that while you're speaking, Paul, the analogy that I'm hearing in my head is like a basketball team who's, down by 1 point, 3 seconds left, the coach calls a timeout, they're all in the huddle, everybody knows their roles. Everybody's much more confident if they're all alignment on exactly what's going to happen versus a free-for-all, right? So I think it's a perfect example of why you need that kind of tool. It makes perfect sense.
It's like, imagine trying to play a sport where everybody's operating from a different set of rules.
Yeah.
Right? You're playing basketball, but to you, a 3 points worth 6 points. To somebody else, a free throw is worth 0 points. And to somebody else, there's no out of bounds. And for somebody else, there's no shot clock. Right? Like, how are you going to function as a team if you're not aligned on the rules of engagement going into it? So
definitely a lot of parallels there with negotiations as well, too, because, we'll talk about that in a minute, but people trying to understand and perceive what the other side's motivations are, what their drivers are, because you want them to walk away with a win also. So we'll touch on that in a minute. But I want to talk a minute about fear in negotiations. What have you seen? I have the luxury of asking you, what have you seen? A lot of guests, I have to ask, what do you think? But you've seen so many slices of different kinds of negotiations. What have you seen is the thing that most people are most fearful of headed into a negotiation? Is it, being the fear of being uncomfortable, or I'll let you go with that. But what do you think people fear the most about corporate negotiations?
Reputational risk. Almost 100%. You can boil down any negotiation, talk to anybody, any frontline negotiator who's going into a deal when they don't have good alignment and they're not super confident. What are they worried about? They're worried about, what impact is this going to have on me? Both from a reputational perspective, a financial perspective, a career progression perspective. All right, like, people are selfish. Let's be real, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. We all are. We care about ourselves, and that's what people fear. People fear, hey, if this thing doesn't work, what are the negative implications and impacts to me? And am I not going to make my numbers for the year? If I don't make my numbers, that means I don't get my bonus. If I don't get my bonus, that means I don't get to buy that new car I want or go on that vacation I want to go on, right? That's, one aspect of it. The other one is, again, reputational. Okay, if I go into this big deal, it's an important deal for myself and for the company, and I don't get it done the way that there are maybe expectations for me to get it done at, how does that make me look? How does that make me look internally with my colleagues, with my peers, with my boss? Am I less than? Am I not good at my job? Right? And then again, we'll start playing the blame game. Well, I only failed because other people failed me. So again, I think that's the biggest fear is look at it selfishly. What do I have to lose? And that's the first place to start when you're talking about fear, because that's how people think.
Yeah, and I think that also ties into, and pretty closely to, another, call it, emotion or character attribute that are part of folks going into a negotiation, which is ego, right? I think that ego a lot of times can stem from insecurity or some of those fears. So in your experience, if we're speaking about ego, have you seen that as a big part of negotiations, and is it a big impediment, or is it more of just like something that's kind of annoying that people deal with?
It's one of those things that's different in every deal and for every person. I think we all know those people in our lives that have those big egos that need to be massaged. From my perspective, I like dealing with people with big egos. Why? Because I understand what makes them tick. Now, it's, neither here nor there, because you can't control the people that you negotiate with. But there are certain strategies that are very effective at dealing with people with big egos. They want to feel important. Sure. They want to feel like they've won. They want to feel like they've beat you up. They want to feel like they got the majority of the pie in the deal, right? Let them feel that way. And it's a grossly oversimplified,
Sure.
kind of take on it. But, again, people are people. And if you understand what makes them tick, great, I can use that to my advantage. So in that respect, and I think the world is changing. The younger generations, I think, have a lot less ego. I'm going to paint with broad strokes here because,
sure, of course,
obviously, everybody's different. But from my experience, it's the older, more entrenched, senior people in organizations that tend to have those egos and tend to need those egos stroked. The younger generations coming up, less so. I would say they're more apt to err on the side of collaboration over competition. So I think, like all things, the tides turn and eventually things change. But that'll take years and years and years to clear out the backlog of those egos. So we'll still be here for a while longer.
We'll still be dealing with it for a while. Yeah, I agree. It does feel, if I call it the sniff test without the analytics, it does feel that ego is kind of a little bit of an antiquated thing. Like, it does feel like the younger generations are getting away from that a little bit and focusing more on collaboration.
Yeah, again, it's a broad generalization.
Sure.
But I just think younger generations are more apt to collaborate on stuff, and they're also less comfortable with conflict, and they're less comfortable with being uncomfortable, quite frankly. Yeah. And so, that old hard-nosed style of negotiation where it was, me versus you, and we're going to duel this thing out until one of us, is victorious. I think that's an older mentality that a lot of the younger generation don't have. And a lot of their first approach would be, hey, how can we collaborate on something? Because I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to put myself in that uncomfortable position. And so it's easier for me to be collaborative than it is to be competitive around stuff.
Well, that's interesting too, Paul. There's another factor, because when we look at negotiations and personality types of the people we're negotiating with, I've witnessed that as well. I mean, I think, a lot of the younger generation don't want to interact in a real way at all, right? They consider text messaging to be talking, right? They confuse text messaging and talking. And so yes, to your point, you're probably going to have maybe going to have some more collaboration because they don't want to be uncomfortable.
I think they grew up in a digital world. A lot of them,
Yeah.
they grew up in a world where it was common to have a text message conversation with 14 other people in it. And that's just, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting changes in the coming decades as the Gen Zs grow up and enter into the workforce. I know they're already there, but writ large, because I think just the way they look at things and the way they think about things is very different than generations past because of the technology that they've grown up with and around. And I think that greatly influences the way we think about things, the way we interact with other people. TBD if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. I mean, so far it seems maybe good, but I'm sure someone would argue the opposite side of that.
Yeah, and then right in the middle of all that, we're going to chuck, the humanity changing part of AI, and which obviously is a big, huge, broad topic in general. But I know that AI is a component of our Toolmaker Connect. But if we look at Paul AI from a negotiation standpoint, aside from Maker Connect, what do you think about that in the sense of? Do you think that a lot of companies will head in that direction to utilize some form of AI to, review offers, create counter offers, anchoring, any of that stuff? Or what are your general thoughts in, June of 2023 on that? Probably, by the way, I give you carte blanche that this could change in July, but right now it's June.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not gonna, everybody knows where we stand with AI right now. It's obviously the hot topic. Everybody's trying to figure out how to leverage AI for their own benefit, and rightfully so. This is probably the next big platform shift that we've had or will have. Mobile was, the last one. Before that, it was the internet, and this is probably the next great platform shift. How that gets used in negotiation, I think, is still early days to know. In more simplistic negotiations, there's certainly a direct path forward even today. And this is where, if we're talking more on the buy side procurement supply chain side of negotiations, on the more transactional or non-strategic spends, these are the types of negotiations where we're only negotiating over a few well-defined variables: price, payment terms, volumes, contract lengths, things like this that are easily defined. That's a great space for AI to play in, and I think you're already starting to see some companies lean into it, and I think you're going to continue to see that because those are very well defined and understood parameters to give an AI space to dig into.
Gotcha.
Where you're going to see a lot slower progress in the realm of AI in negotiation is going to be your complex, strategic, highly important supplier vendor negotiations that involve, a lot more moving parts rather than just the simple price, volume, payment terms, contract length. Because that's when you start getting into things that aren't as easily defined. And when you get into stuff that isn't easily defined, now your cost value perspective of that variable changes greatly from one party to the other, right? I can make a pretty accurate assumption that Matt Despins values $100 roughly at the same rate that Paul Voisard values $100. It's money, it's $100, it's well understood. Great. I can teach an AI that, and I can use that information to make an assessment on a particularly simplistic negotiation. But now if we start introducing other variables that aren't as cut and dry and black and white as, say, the value of money, right? Maybe it's an indemnity clause in your MSA contract, your master services agreement, right? Who's going to bear the brunt of responsibility if something goes wrong? Or, some sort of long-lived inventory clause. I mean, there's a million and one different things, but as you start to get into these less well-defined terms that still need to be negotiated over, that's a space where I don't think AI is going to be able to really add a lot of value for years to come. I could be wrong. To your point, could be July and somebody could develop something and I'll eat my words come then.
Yep.
But and for us and our clients and the types of negotiations our clients typically work on, they are the more complex, strategic, a lot of moving parts kind of negotiations. They're not your more simplistic. Nobody's calling us up to help them negotiate for the used lawnmower at the garage sale on a Saturday afternoon. That's not what we do. Our clients come to us when they're negotiating multi-year, highly complex, many moving parts, super, important company, important, like, there's a lot of eyeballs on this thing. Those are the kinds of deals that we tend to work on with our clients. And those are the ones that I don't think AI is going to be able to truly tackle for some time to come. Now, the last thing I'll say is you could build some models using AI that might be able to take into consideration some different cost and value perspectives of various things that you're negotiating over. But let me be very clear. When I say AI won't be useful for a few years, I'm saying that in terms of like, hey, AI computer, go negotiate this deal for me. I want to be hands off, and I'm going to replace my 5 frontline negotiators with this one AI, and I don't got to worry about things anymore. No. We're years and years and years away from that. What you might be able to do is build a model that can take into the consideration the different value factors of any particular thing, and it can model out for you, okay, given all the various things that we're negotiating over, given our assessments on costs and values and priorities and objectives, you could probably build something that will say, hey, we recommend that this might be the shape of the package that you might want to present forward to you. We might be in the process of building something that does this.
Mm-hmm.
But my point here is you wouldn't give it the keys and say, here's the car, have at it, come find me again in a month when the deal is done. We're a long ways away from there. But could you build something that provides a sanity check or a, hey, based on all the factors you've told me, we think, going in this direction might be the right way to go. So I think for the next few years, it'll be directional in nature as far as the guidance from AI is concerned in your large strategic complex negotiations. It can be directional, but how much you trust it and how much you lean into it wholeheartedly, that's going to be something that remains to be seen and probably depends on your appetite for risk for handing the keys to the Terminator.
Yeah, what comes to mind as an analogy there is like these cars that can park themselves, right? I mean, I got to speak for myself. If I'm in a car that can park itself, when I pull up and I take my hands off the steering wheel, I'm not just closing my eyes and taking a nap. I'm still watching where the car is going, right? So maybe related there too, like AI will be really good in creating frameworks and directions and overall kind of strategies, but can't be fully trusted at this point to work in the soft space.
We're not at autonomous level 5 self-driving yet.
Yeah.
I don't even think we're technically at level 3 yet, despite what Tesla says. Right? I mean, it's the reason why you can't rip down the highway asleep in your passenger seat while your car is driving. Well, I mean, you could, but that probably won't end well. It's the same analogy for negotiation, right? Like you could build an AI model that can, again, give you that directional guidance, but do you want to trust it and hand it over entirely while you take a nap? No, you probably don't.
No, you definitely don't. And the joke that I always say about the cars is, listen, when my Bluetooth in my car reliably works every time, then I'll consider, maybe giving the hands over the keys over full time. So,
Yeah.
so speaking, we'll kind of wrap this up here in a couple of questions, but speaking about, AI representing more of that analytical science side, but still having some of those, for lack of a better term, if there is a better one, please tell me, but some of those softer areas of a contract, let's talk about negotiations as both an art and as a science. I happen to know Paul. Paul's a very analytical person, highly intelligent, just the truth. Don't mean that as a gregarious compliment. But Paul, how do you see in real life negotiations, how do you see them play out of the balance of art and science?
Okay. So this comes back to every negotiation. There are some irrefutable facts that every negotiation has, right? Like whatever we're negotiating over, the dollars, the cents, the numbers, that we kind of view as the science part of the negotiation, right? And you need to understand that because you need to know what you're there to accomplish from a pure, nuts and bolts perspective of, hey, dollars and cents, what do we need to do here? But the art piece of negotiation, this comes back to at the beginning of the conversation. It's all the other things that people forget about. And I think the problem that most people have in negotiations is they think that the numbers tell the story. And they think that the numbers are going to do their work for them. And I'll explain what I mean by that. You might go into a negotiation. I might be negotiating with you, Matt, and use a simple.
God help me, by the way, if that's the case.
Simplistic example. And let's just say we don't know each other, and it's Saturday afternoon where I'm at your garage sale, and you've got a used toaster, and you've got a price tag on this toaster for $10. And I look at that and I say, well, I don't want to give you $10. It's a garage sale. I'll give you $5 because $5, that's probably fine, right? I mean, it's a toaster. It's a garage sale. I'll give you $5.
Right.
And I offer you $5 and you scoff at me and you tell me to get off your property. And I sit there and I say, that was a harsh reaction to my $5 offer. And I sit there and I say, well, $5 should be fair. That should be a price that Matt should be willing to accept. It's a garage sale, half off. That's kind of like the going rate.
That's what you do.
Yeah, that's what you do. And so this is what I mean by people think that the numbers do the talking for themselves, where they fail to recognize all the other soft elements to a negotiation that lead up, and that's kind of the art piece to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to that example, it's was I preconditioning Matt before I made the offer? Was I managing his expectations leading up to it? Was I delivering satisfaction to him when I made my offer for the toaster? Did I do anything to influence his thinking leading up to that offer of $5? Or did I just go in there and offer him $5? Because if all I did was just walk up there and offer you $5, in Matt's head, maybe he's thinking to himself, this is the world's greatest toaster. This toaster is worth every cent of $10. And if somebody doesn't give me $10, then go fly a kite. If I don't ask questions or kind of find that out or poke and prod and do anything to kind of get that thinking out of Matt's head, then my $5 offer is going to be met with severe resistance because in his head, he's thinking $10 is the way to go. I'm going to get $10 for this toaster. So obviously, this is just a made up example of negotiating over toaster. But in the real world, managing people's expectations and framing the conversation in the way you want it framed has an exponentially more powerful effect on your outcome than whatever your actual offer is or whatever the numbers are that are in your offer. Because again, if you go into a negotiation and Matt's just thinking to himself, $10, $10, $10, and I don't offer him $10, he's immediately going to shut down and say, nope, I want $10. But if I can influence Matt's thinking before I make that offer and start to creep some doubt into his mind that this toaster isn't worth $10, and there's maybe another garage sale down the street that's got a similar toaster, for less amount of money, or the fact that this toaster has some scratches and dents on it and it's very old, and all these other things that I can start to do or say to create some doubt in Matt's mind regarding the value of said toaster, then when I eventually make my offer of $5, Matt, I'm not going to say will accept it, but he's going to be more likely to be receptive to that $5 offer because I've influenced his thinking and his thought process around the value of that toaster before the offer gets made. And that's what we mean by art and science of a negotiation. Every negotiation has the science bit. That's the numbers, right? Those are the cold hard facts. Yeah, we all understand that this is the arena we're playing in. But then the art piece influences how the science gets played out over the course of a negotiation. Because the funny thing is that in negotiation and in life, a dollar isn't always necessarily worth a dollar to
Right.
everybody, depending
Sure.
on how they're thinking about things. And so it's your job and responsibility as a negotiator to try and influence the other party's perceptions around those things that are important to you or important to them. Either, change your perception in an up value perspective or in a down value perspective, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So that when it comes time to get into the science bit, the numbers, you're in a much more favorable position for the other party to accept your offer or to negotiate around said offer, as opposed to just being stuck in their ways with whatever they're thinking.
And correct me if I'm wrong too, Paul, but that also, in terms of maybe learning about what the other side, what value they might place on a particular item, in this case, the toaster, that's part of pre-planning as well, right? That's why we talk about negotiations and the importance of pre-planning, so that you can start to think about how people might be valuing that item and make a plan around that. Is that right?
100%. That's the other big fatal flaw that a lot of people, or the mistake a lot of people make in negotiation is they only view it from their perspective, and they go into a deal saying like, I need this, I have to have this. This is really important to me. It's all me kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to what do they need? What's important to them? What's their objective? What do they care about? Those are the questions you should be asking, because by understanding what's important to them, you can understand where you have leverage in your negotiation. You can understand how to use that information to your advantage to get the things that you want and you need. But most people don't do that. Most people go into it with them at their forefront. Why? Because it's easy to know what you care about, because it's you.
It's you.
You know what you care about, right? It's harder to understand what the other party cares about, because we're not them and we're not inside their head and we don't know what they're thinking. So again, one of those human nature things, we tend to negotiate from our perspective a lot in negotiation, and that really limits our upside value potential, because what ends up happening practically, speaking in negotiation terms, what ends up happening is we make concessions against things too easily because they're not important to us. Meanwhile, they might be super important to the other party, but because they weren't important to us, we didn't really care about it. And we're like, oh yeah, I can do that thing for you, or I can give you that widget, or I can agree to those terms. And we didn't get much value in return for it because we didn't care about it. But the way you should be thinking about it is, how much does the other party care about it? Because if they care about it a lot, then they will be willing to give you value in areas that you care about in order for them to get that thing that they care about.
To the listeners, I've heard us talk about that here at the Maker Group. I can't tell you how many times. And that's the first time right now that actually just sunk in for me. I got what you're saying. If we're looking at it from how much they value it, their position of having value on that item gives us leverage to attach more value to the things that we want. Is that right, Paul? My understanding?
Yeah. So again, let's come back to the toaster example. Stupid example, but we'll come back.
It's a good one.
Right. Now let's just imagine that you've got this toaster for sale, and I am a graphic design artist.
Yep.
And we get to talking during your garage sale, about this toaster that I really want to have. And you tell me that you're launching a new product startup, something out of your garage. You're creating these new widgets. They're going to be great, but you're terrible at technology and you don't really know how to use computers, and you're not sure where to start. I could look at that situation. I could say, well, I'm a graphic artist, and, why don't, I just do your website for you. And, you give me your toaster and, I'll do your website for you. And you might look at it and be like, yeah, I think that's obviously probably not a fair trade, $10 of a toaster for a website. But the point here in the analogy is it's easy for me to agree to do your website because, in essence, doing that doesn't cost me anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a little bit of my time. Let's say instead of the toaster, let's say you had a motorbike that you're looking to sell. Let's say an old vintage Harley. And maybe it wasn't for sale in the garage sale, but I saw it in the corner of your garage and I asked about it and you said, oh yeah, it's a bike. I don't really ride it anymore. Maybe it's worth 5 or 10 grand, whatever it is. And I say, well, tell you what, why don't I do this website for you? The wrong perspective is to look at that and say, well, me doing a website for you doesn't cost me very much. It's just my time, and therefore I'm willing to do it easily for you. The way you should be looking at it is how valuable is a website to Matt Despins in this moment? And, the simple way to think about that is, what would it cost you to develop a website to pay somebody else to do it, right? Like, what's the current market rate? But again, people generally don't think about things in those terms. They always look at it from my perspective and say, well, it's easy for me to do. It doesn't cost me very much. I could do it on the weekend. And so, I might do that fair trade for you because it doesn't cost me very much. But in reality, the way we should be thinking about it is, how valuable is that to the other party? And is what I'm getting in return enough value to compensate for the value that they're getting from that thing that I'm doing for them or giving to them? So kind of a not the best analogy, but,
No, it actually makes complete sense. And that's exactly what it is that establishing, and when the maker group trains and coaches, it's a far more complex direction that we send people in. But at the end of the day, one of the basic tenets is trying to work towards figuring out what value the other party has in any particular, in this case, you're using an item, but sometimes it could be a clause in a contract, like you pointed out, a perpetuity clause or some of these other things, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you're negotiating over. You need to understand the cost and value perspective of everything to the other party, because again, that's where you're gonna find your leverage in your negotiations.
So, Paul, to wrap it up here, you are a founder here at the Maker Group. You had mentioned earlier that you had previous employment somewhere else. So not in anything about anybody else, but let's just talk about some of the DNA about the Maker Group just for about 2 minutes here. As a founder, what were your goals when you started the Maker Group? What company characteristics, what expertise, in addition to negotiation, what do you really want to be known by, and what's the Maker Group's value proposition?
The impetus for starting the company was seeing a need in the marketplace for negotiation support that was beyond a one and done training, which again was the industry standard and has been the industry standard for the past 30 odd years.
Yep.
That's just not the way people learn in the long run. So we wanted to create a solution that was not, again, just a one and done thing, but rather a platform for success, for negotiation success today, tomorrow, and forever into the future. So that was kind of the big thing that drove us to say, hey, can you do this better? Because in the end, everybody can be a good negotiator. It's a skill like any other. I say this a lot. It can be taught, it can be practiced, it can be honed. Some people are naturally better negotiators than other people, but ultimately, everybody can be a good negotiator because, again, negotiation is just a process and it's a skill that can be applied and learned. So how do you get more people to be better negotiators in the long run was the question that we want to solve. So long-term embedding was part of it. Obviously, we leverage technology quite heavily to make that happen. But the other big thing was just taking a more modern and practical real-world approach to negotiation. not to, again, talk about
Nope.
competitor activity,
Yep.
but there's some stagnant and stale ideas floating out there as to what negotiation is or what it is not
In the industry in general. Yes, sir.
in the industry in general. Yeah. And we wanted to take a fresh look at that and say, negotiating in the year 2023, what does that look like? What do you need to be successful negotiating in this environment? And understanding that nothing ever stays the same. So another big core principle and tenet of ours is tinker, adapt, adjust. The workshop we run today is different than the workshop we ran 3 years ago, because guess what? 3 years ago, COVID didn't exist.
Yep.
Right. So, COVID changed the game for better or worse, but for worse for most people. And people had to adapt. And again, our approach adapted along with it. So I think the most important thing that we do is we're flexible, we're adaptable, and we take a long-term focus and approach to creating negotiators, effective negotiators, again, not just today, but tomorrow and long into the future.
Yeah, I can say that not just because I'm on a podcast here with my boss and my founder, but legitimately as an employee here, I've seen a ton of flexibility, a ton of adaptability in addition to the expertise. But I've really seen a group of people who not only care about negotiations, are passionate about it, but also a group of people who are extremely flexible and ready to, there's nothing sacred here at the Maker Group other than our core tenets of integrity and, having respect for people and whatnot. But other than that stuff, we'll adapt and we'll change. And I've seen that firsthand as a new employee. So with that, Paul, unless you have anything else, that'll be good. Anything else you want to add to wrap it up?
No, I think it was a good conversation. Covered a lot of topics. Appreciate it.